Hello, and welcome back to BHL Day 2021, Reflections in Crisis. I'm Gilles Dessilien, and I'm the General Director of Collections at the Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris. Our institution was expected to host this meeting in person last year, and this year again, but we are experiencing another lockdown here in Paris, and due to the global situation, I really regret that we cannot have you here in person. However, as you will see later on, our team in Paris has done their best effort to make you feel as if you were in our library and museum today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second session of our program, the Partner Reflection Panel, Finding Opportunities During a Global Pandemic. During this session, we'll hear from representatives from 5 BHL partner institutions about BHL's impact during the COVID-19 pandemic. First, a few logistical reminders. This program is being recorded. Recordings will be made available on the BHL Day event page. Closed captioning has been enabled. You may adjust your settings from the closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. Attendees, your video and audio have been turned off. Please use the Q&A question and answer feature to submit questions for the speakers. We will address questions during the discussion period at the end of this session. Now, getting to the point of this session, it's been a rough year for all of us, a challenging one. Most libraries have been closed to the public. Librarians had to develop their activities online and in many ways reinvent their job. We have been missing the direct and social connection with our patrons and users. Among library staff, one of the things we've been missing most is traveling, and above all, exchanging with our BHL colleagues and friends. This session is a great opportunity to catch up, to share lessons learned, to see how BHL librarians have been managing to adjust to this situation. Our first presentation for this session is by Jane Smith, outgoing head of library and archives at the Natural History Museum in London, UK.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully successfully. Hopefully that's worked. Great. Gildas, thank you very much for the introduction. And it's been a pleasure working at the Natural History Museum, and especially colleagues. And that's the theme of this talk, really, about how global partnerships have been incredibly important during this last 12 months, and teamwork across that global partnerships. But it also reflects the teamwork that takes place in institutions like the NHM. Now, in the UK, we're coming out of lockdown, our third lockdown. And what I hope to do over the next few minutes is just share some of the lessons learned during the last 12 months. But I'll start with setting the context a little bit of the NHM. It's a large organisation that operates across more than one site. Those of you who are able to join us in London for the BHL at 10 celebrations may have also gone to our site at Tring, not just the site at South Kensington. And the role of the library and archives within that context is to support the full range of all the activities of the museum. And you won't be surprised that that has held its challenge. Also during this period, the museum has been developing plans to deliver an ambitious set of plans to deliver a strategy to 2031. And within that, the Library and Archive has been working on 3 of the top challenges within that strategy, enabling researchers to work seamlessly between the physical and the digital. And that's been escalated during the last 12 months, but also engaging the widest possible audience for the content that we provide. And this is where BHL is playing a critical role for us, as well as securing the future of our collections. And that's not just about developing our collections and storing them, but how do we widen access? And to follow on from what Ining was saying earlier this afternoon and the morning for some of you, is how do we use that content and unlock it so that it is directly relevant to current research? So one of the areas that the library has been focusing on has been to look at ways through that strategy and our plans that we can help support science develop their activities around a core museum mission that centres around the planetary emergency that we face. In addition to that, the museum has been awarded a significant grant by government to develop a new site at Harwell in Oxfordshire. And the library has been playing a role over the last 12 months to analyse its collections in order to support plans for that site. And our collection is international in scope. I've skipped forward a little bit too there. Our collection is international in scope, and it dates back to the 15th century. It directly complements the specimen collections held at the museum, as well as those collections that are held across the globe in other similar institutions from a library and archive perspective. And those extensive collections map the development of natural history sciences over time and collecting and how species migration and has changed over time. And within that, the scope of our user base is therefore very broad, ranging from core science users across the arts and humanities into public interest, but also supporting some of those global initiatives that are trying to address the global challenges that we're facing. During this particular 12 months, we've also had to find ways of enabling our colleagues not just to work across multiple sites, but also working from home, and those that have continued to work in the field during the last 12 months. Another thing that has been picked up and will be picked up by other colleagues on this panel will be how do we address and describe and set the historical context in a better way to address the sensitivities around certainly some of our earlier collections. There is a piece of work happening within the museum, but what I'm hoping is that the strands of work that have been developed relating to this in the BHL annual implementation plan will complement what is happening locally, and what we're also working on locally will feed into that broader global BHL plan. So the AMNH has been part of BHL from the very beginning, so from 2006. But why BHL has been so important for us is that the way that BHL has developed and how we're working together as a team in BHL is that the strategic goals for BHL complement and mirror what we're trying to achieve strategically at the NHS. To have collaborated over those 15 years, and why this collaboration and this global teamwork has been so critical during the last 12 months is that we are uniting our collections virtually. We're widening access to those collections. Collectively, we are creating a critical mass that has created a data resource that is enabling our science, but also cultural heritage researchers to unlock the data in our collections so that it's relevant for those science challenges, but also that broader open knowledge. Another critical thing for the Library and Archives at the Natural History Museum that BHL is helping to support is repatriating virtually content in our collections that directly relates to the biodiversity and actually the geodiversity around the world. And it's a step in linking our library and archive collections to those specimen collections. Another critical area is around sharing infrastructure and systems standards and practice. We're finding through our global teamwork joint solutions that are robust and sustainable. They directly support what we're doing individually in our local institutions, but enabling us to widen our reach considerably. Another area that I'm sure other colleagues will touch on is the professional support through that global network, the sharing of knowledge and expertise. And that has been critical during the last 12 months in understanding how we can enable our services and our collections and our content still to be made available while people are trying to work from home under very difficult circumstances and trying to continue their research. It's also helped us to open up our thinking about some of the wider collection development issues that we're facing, and directly dovetailing into that massive programme of work to develop a new science centre for the NHM. And this is an overarching concept that, and thanks to Martin Kalfatik for sharing this concept, through that feeds down directly to our individual institutions. So moving on to talk more specifically about what we've been doing through this global period. My colleagues across the department had to react very rapidly, and they've shown a considerable amount of adaptability and sheer hard work in enabling the library still to function effectively during this very difficult 12 months. And providing access to the content that we already have in BHL has been an important part of this, but also enabling us to, through working at home, to continue working and to continue providing access through directly through the NHM site. But one of the things that's come out of the pandemic, and one of the silver linings, I guess, of the pandemic, has been how it's escalated that digital shift. Now, what I'm showing on this slide is, and thanks to Mel Smith and Neil and John, the team at NHM, for this diagram of how two of our colleagues operate in the museum normally, searching across a range of both physical and digital collections. And even though they may specialise in paleontology or botany, they will be looking at collections and content across the different subject areas. And what's happened through the pandemic is that the digitisation work that we've done so far and all our efforts around BHL have enabled, to at least a large degree, to support research. So the lessons learned out of this pandemic is that providing user access in different ways in this digital environment is critical for us to continue to develop. Increasing the digitalization of our collections and providing new ways through digital scholarship techniques is going to be increasingly important. We're working differently because of the circumstances of the pandemic, but many people are going to carry on working in those ways as we go forward. So BHL has been a key part in how the NHM has delivered its user support and access to its content and collections online during the last 12 months. And that will continue, it has to continue. One of the things that we have been able to do, though, is still add content. We work with Internet Archive, and there have been periods of time where colleagues from Internet Archive had still been able to come on site and still digitise some of our collections and to meet some of the demands that have been raised during the last 12 months. So we've still added about 40,000 pages of content. So the corpus of BHL is still growing. We've also used that time, though, to work on enhancing our metadata and enhancing the accessibility of that content and surfacing it via our own website. Something that's also been happening through colleagues in the Library and Archive team in BHL that has been developed side by side with our efforts for BHL is developing access to a lot of our original material, which is in high demand because of the richness of the data around specimens in that content. So colleagues have not just digitized that content, but set up a crowdsourcing project to transcribe that material and make it available. Hopefully, eventually, it will connect with a material that's already in BHL, but it is currently available and usable. So overall, and I'm going to summarize here, our partnership with BHL before and after the pandemic is critically important, but what it has enabled during this particular 12 months has been enabling us to extend our global reach. It's enabled our local NHM colleagues to still have access to content that is directly relevant to the work that they're trying to continue during this period. And in BHL, and I know in BHL generally, has gone through various spikes as various lockdowns have happened and as people have transitioned to working from home. It really has been an invaluable resource, and it critically has enabled the museum and the library in particular to carry on functioning, even if we haven't been able to open our doors as normal to welcome physical visitors through the door. I mentioned transitions. Lisa Cardy will be taking over as interim head of Library and Archives. I will be leaving the museum after 15 years. So my time at the museum has been as long as my involvement in BHL. So I'll be leaving at the end of May. We also sadly say farewell to Alison Harding, who has been tremendous in coordinating all of the museum's activity around BHL and contributing. She too will be leaving at the end of May, but she's handing over to Martin French, who will, I know, carry on that good work and continue to make sure that the museum is able to contribute to BHL, along with Lisa and my fantastic colleagues within the department. So I'm going to close by saying farewell and thank you for the memories. It has been personally such a privilege being part of BHL from the very beginning, serving on the executive committee, and I have so many happy and fun memories, as well as all the hard work involved. And I'd like to say particular thanks to colleagues in the Secretariat and in the Executive Board. So Martin and Connie and David and Nancy before and currently all the team at the Secretariat, but also all of you, my colleagues across all of our global partners. It has been such a privilege working with you all. Past a fantastic team there still is at the NHM. So much talent, so much creativity and so much commitment, not just to the museum, but to BHL and collaborating widely. So I wish you all the very best for the future and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jane, not only for your very inspiring presentation, but also all the work you've done for BHL and in your library. I was lucky to visit you there a couple of years ago when you could still travel and meet people in person. And I must say how impressed I am by all the work you've done and the energy you put and the intelligence you put in your work. So it's not for me to say now in this context, but thank you very much back. As a reminder, back to the session, please submit your question via the question and answer feature. We'll save questions for the end. I would like now to introduce our next speaker, Jacqueline A. Chapman. She's head of Digital Library and Digitization at the Smithsonian Library and Archives in Washington. Jacqueline, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Jacqueline E. Chapman, head of the Digital Library and Digitization at Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. And today I'll be discussing being at home with metadata in every sense of the phrase, both working from home and helping others to become comfortable with digital tools and systems. There are some themes interwoven throughout my talk, including the importance of being a member of a consortium like BHL. I'll also be showcasing the hidden labor behind such digital libraries, and I'll be reflecting on what it means to be a manager during a global pandemic, supporting staff and working together through crisis. And of course, I'll be discussing building digital fortitude, or confidence in working with digital surrogates and metadata. Compared to many BHL partners, the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, or SLA, is a little different in that it doesn't exclusively serve natural history researchers and collections. We support Smithsonian scholars in art, history, culture, as well as the natural and physical sciences from a number of locations. As the Digital Library and Digitization Department, we provide imaging services for all of SLA's locations and in all subject areas. And my talk today will be focusing on how this department and how my team work together with our staff across SLA to work on different projects in BHL. This is the team that creates and manages the SLA digital surrogates that you rely on. We contribute materials to our own digital library in addition to BHL. And to date, we have contributed nearly 11 million pages to BHL. This is the team behind everything in this presentation. And my thanks go to David, Stefan, and Daniel, who are remarkable teammates and colleagues, and without whom none of this would be possible. When the Smithsonian entered emergency telework status in mid-March 2020, digitization ceased. Our department went home, and we still do not yet have an anticipated date of return. My team needed to adjust from working in a very physical environment with books and imaging equipment to a fully digital one. And I was asked to develop projects for our SLA colleagues to work on to augment their other work from home projects. To date, over 24 staff members have worked with our department over the last year. As I describe how we adapted to this new reality, I'll be sharing with you images from our collection. These images will not have citations next to them, as you might expect from a library. Rather, each will display the name of the person who worked on that item during this emergency telework period. One image from an SLA BHL item worked on by each person who has joined our efforts. As you view each image, I invite you to reflect on the people behind the work that make BHL and other digital libraries possible. The task I was given was to accommodate an unknown number of staff for an unknown amount of time, which was very daunting. I needed to think about how to support user needs from afar, and I also needed to consider how to approach being a manager during this time, knowing that my colleagues, my team, and I are all people experiencing trauma. I knew that I needed to provide stability in a time of uncertainty for all of us. The project I selected would need to support a wide variety of SLA colleagues with different and changing needs. Ultimately, we've had over 20 staff working with us from anywhere from 4 to 40 hours a week. The SLA colleagues I was being asked to support would have very different training to ours. Staff have expertise in natural history, yes, but also art, history, and culture, or central services like acquisitions or preservation. Most staff were inexperienced with creating and applying metadata and had limited experience with digital tools. In fact, most staff had never really used the front end of BHL, let alone the back end. I realized that in order to be successful, I needed a project that was flexible, individual, social, and most of all, supported. This work has been flexible. The time spent with us has varied from day to day and week to week. I knew that people might join or leave at any time, and they have. So it needed to be a project that we could stop working on and start working on and off all the time. This work also needed to be individual and independent, where staff could learn and work at their own pace without pressure or deadlines. And ideally, we'd also have the ability to customize to interests and abilities and the needs of each individual person. And yet this work needed to be social also, and I highlight here that this was optional, but some staff have missed the ease of the physical office, and this project was one way to ensure continued connection and to stave off feelings of isolation. Other staff didn't want that at all, of course, but still, a sense of team and shared purpose was vital for morale, as was the ability to share praise, milestones, and highlights with each other. Most importantly, this work needed to be supported. To make this work, we would need robust documentation, and it was clear that our colleagues would need help to develop the confidence to work with digital tools and metadata. I devised a mentorship model where our department would serve as trainers and cheerleaders. In order to grow that digital fortitude, our mentees would need responsive support, but my staff would also need to have that space to not have to be on call 24/7. We also knew that by fostering these relationships, we would help to create a sense of safety needed to ask questions and make mistakes. All of this requires a lot of emotional labor and represented a real change from what my staff had been doing before with digital imaging as part of a small team. Enabling this kind of work meant that there could be no other deadlines or pressure and would require a lot of support, coaching, and cheerleading from me. I knew this meant that we needed a project built around the concept of asynchronous collective work. And when I think of asynchronous collective work, I think of BHL. BHL has been doing this for over a decade. Its infrastructure is built for this: cloud-based systems, an issue tracking system for assigning and monitoring work, documentation used the world over, and most importantly, collective priorities to help with decision-making and to ensure that we would have coordinated efforts towards common agreed-upon goals. One established goal of the BHL consortium is to support image discovery. Since 2011, BHL has been encouraging partners to identify illustrations within their materials through pagination, Flickr upload, and tagging. We had supported aspects of this work in the past, and it seemed to meet much of my criteria for an asynchronous, impactful, and meaningful project that would be able to scale up and down easily. Through pagination, we enhance page-level metadata for digital surrogates. This work supports human and machine users of BHL data, and I knew that tens of thousands of SLA items in BHL still needed this pagination work. If you've spent enough time in BHL, you've likely encountered items like this before. On the right, you can see the illustrations and blank pages that make up the book. On the left, the navigation pane saying only text, 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 text. How to find a specific page number, the table of contents, an index, a plate. This screenshot represents a before state, and this screenshot is the after. Plate numbers have been applied with care, and it is easy to navigate through the book to find what you need. And in the lower left, you can now see that the item has links to BHL Flickr, where full-page illustrations are released from the text and can be perused together as a resource. Each image in Flickr has a link back to its home text in BHL, and as we saw, the pages in BHL link out to Flickr. When we upload images to Flickr, we're able to apply keyword tags. This is all part of the initial upload process. Basic tags like plants or fern enable discovery and support future tagging efforts by making it possible to isolate work to particular groups. Additional detailed tagging is done through machine readable tags, and such work is predominantly focused on binomial and trinomial taxonomic names, as well as artist tags for names and VIAF identifiers. Both basic keyword tags and taxonomic name tags and artist name machine tags provide image-level metadata that is often not available at the title level. For example, a book might be described with a subject such as birds, but that book's catalog record would not generally have the names of each bird depicted in the volume. Similarly, such records generally do not list the artist of each individual plate. This uploading and tagging work makes these images more discoverable and accessible and shareable. The book that this image is from was digitized over 12 years ago, and in that time, it has been viewed over 1,800 times. The illustrations from the book were uploaded to Flickr 2 months ago as part of our work. Each image within the book has been viewed over 1,300 times already, and this image has been viewed over 14,800 times. And so I decided to focus on these projects, which I could shape to be flexible, individual, social, and supported. And I began to plan for how to organize and manage this effort with an influx of SLA staff. Choosing these projects meant that my team was largely familiar with each step and were in a good position to support others in this work. They each had extensive experience with pagination and some familiarity with BHL tools, systems, and workflows, though perhaps a bit uneven. And again, they were new to this mentorship role. To scale up, as we prepared, we began by cross-training and sharing knowledge with each other. We put the BHL documentation through its paces and gave feedback to the BHL Secretariat on areas in need of clarification. We have continued to collaboratively iterate upon this as we onboard new mentees. We helped to establish and participated in the BHL Pagination Working Group, which revised the BHL Pagination standards and established a data dictionary for all BHL partners to use. And we brainstormed some adjustments to the back-end user interface with the BHL technical team. With a project in place, and while still iterating on documentation and workflow, we began to build our queue of materials for our SLA colleague mentees to work on. We wanted to prioritize books with illustrations. Apart from the fact that this was a goal of BHL's, I felt that this was good for morale. If folks were going to be looking at each book page by page, having pictures to break up the monotony seemed important and could perhaps bring glimmers of beauty during a truly difficult and painful time. The pagination work we had already done gave us a head start as well, and a bit of a cushion of uploading work that could be done. There was one complication though: find pictures in books that don't already say they have pictures in them, which could be its own presentation. I just know that this work is ongoing and perhaps even more hidden than the labor I'm discussing now. While reviewing, we were also able to triage materials to the interests and skills of the people working with us, such as languages they knew or were learning, and we were also able to cater to subject expertise. All of this was good for BHL and good for our colleagues. Our department continues to review pagination work completed by mentees as part of the mentorship program. This supports learning and instruction and ensures that our data quality remains to standard. A few mentees are so experienced now that they are as good at pagination as my own team, and we have been able to cease the review process for them. And yet pagination has not been the only aspect of QA for us. We have also been checking for title and volume level metadata, making corrections or requesting enhancements from our cataloging colleagues. We have also continued to identify materials for other BHL projects, such as the Women in Natural History collection. Additionally, while paginating, we have all been reviewing each digital surrogate page by page, and in the process, finding possible errors in some of our older legacy materials. We've been making cues for materials that may need re-imaging upon return to campus. Reviewing these titles has also meant that we are identifying materials that are not currently available in BHL. While paginating a serial, for example, we may notice missing volumes and can request that such volumes be digitized by ourselves or our BHL partners at a later date. Since March 16th, 2020, we've paginated over 3,000 items, which amounts to over 1.3 million pages. We've also uploaded over 74,000 images to Flickr. Over 7,000 of these have taxonomic names applied, and over 2,100 of these have artist names applied. I am so proud of what we've been able to accomplish together, but this needs context. I ran some statistics for 3 years of April to March pagination work. Looking at items paginated, you can see the significant jump here, but items don't really capture the work we've been doing. A book can be 10 pages or 1,000 or more. Looking at pages paginated is where the real work can be seen. As a group, we're working through pages at such a rate that what we usually accomplish in a year is being completed about every 2 to 3 months. The major difference, of course, is in Flickr uploading. As I mentioned, Flickr uploading had not been a central part of our digital program prior to the pandemic. All of these stats help me to showcase this work and to capture the changes in our priorities during this time, but they're not, to me, the real success, and were never the true goal. The real success is in having exposed so many of our SLA colleagues to digital library work and watching them all grow in confidence and even comfort with metadata and digital systems, all while providing them with meaningful, impactful work during emergency telework, and while allowing maximum flexibility as circumstances continue to change. This tweet is one I could not have imagined prior to emergency telework. The National Postal Museum talking about BHL and digital library work. It is wonderful to see my colleagues describing their work with us and how it ties to our purpose as information professionals. Some have written or are in the process of writing blog posts describing the materials they've worked with and the things that they've learned about digital library work. We are honored that our department has been able to support our users and our colleagues during this time, thanks to the BHL Consortium. I'm proud of the support systems we created, the boundaries that we set, and the flexibility, space, and respect we've been able to give each other during this time. With this work, we've been supporting researchers, inspiring artists, and I think even bringing joy. This tweet is an example of the kind of feedback that has been so valuable to us. It's important for me to be able to convey appreciation and impact to the team, and it helps us all to show the value of this work. I can't thank you all enough for continuing to share the ways that the work that we did before the pandemic and the work that we do now supports you in your endeavors. We're still at home, but now our colleagues are increasingly comfortable working with metadata and will be able to apply this newfound confidence and skill set to other areas as we start to move into a new normal. And I know that we're cultivating allies and partners in support of resourcing now that they have a better understanding of how the digital libraries that they use are created and maintained. And so we'll return to campus, and our department will return to image capture. We'll get to that QA queue and our digitization request list as well. I don't yet know when, but we will. And in the meantime, I ask you all to jump in. Let us know about items that need pagination to be more navigable, items with illustrations that could be uploaded to Flickr and augmented, and titles that the BHL consortium should digitize when we can. And you are always welcome to join the larger BHL community in adding taxonomic and artist names to our images in Flickr. We are all, after all of us, at home with metadata. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I think it's been really great hearing your sharing of the challenge of being an online manager. That sounds pretty familiar to me, and I think to a couple of us, but also sharing the solutions and the achievements of your team. You have already received a couple of compliments and questions in the Q&A, but please, we'll save them for the discussion, and please remember to use this channel to ask questions to Jacqueline and to the other panelists. The cool thing about being online, for one thing, is that you can travel really cheap and fast. So we're about to cross the Atlantic to get to Europe, and we're actually going to Germany now. Our next speaker for this panel is Elisa Herrmann. She's head of the Department Discovery Services and Information Management at the Museum für Naturkunde in Leibniz Institute for Evolution and Biodiversity Science in Berlin. Lisa, it's very nice to see you. Please keep up with this discussion, and we're really eager to hear your report on this time.
Thank you very much, Gidas. Hello, everyone. Today, I would like to present to you how the pandemic, despite being very difficult times, did have some positive influence on the development of our library. Therefore, I would like to take you back to the situation before the pandemic, so you get a better idea where we started. The library of the Museum für Naturkunde was established in 1810, and therefore we have a large and significant historical collection that was not yet accessible online. And for a long time, we have been a branch library of the Humboldt University of Berlin. And in 2009, when the museum became a member of the Leibniz Research Association, we also separated from the university and became an autonomous library again, so to say, with all the advantages and disadvantages. One advantage is that we are very close to our colleagues. We have very strong personal contacts with them. Thanks to pattern-driven acquisition, the collection is more closely linked to the user needs of the museum and the research community here. However, the library missed the resources to keep up with the infrastructure developments of our other libraries. And to be fair, the infrastructure was already outdated in 2009 as well. And the team then considered their technical competence just slightly beyond the absolute basics, and they did not have the skills to install innovative or up-to-date infrastructure and to therefore update, change the workflows. So a lot of the processes remained unchanged during the last decades and are still based on paper, or at best are additionally electronically documented. Since 2009, also the staff member reduced due to different reasons. And by 2017, it was basically a one-person library. So between 2009 and 2018, the library fell asleep, and I like to refer to her as the Sleeping Beauty in this time. The wake-up call, or the transformation, began at the end of 2017 with a new colleague who initiated and established the Coordination Office for Scientific Publishing, and therefore brought also new services to the library's portfolio that would also change the image of the library within the museum. I myself started as the head of library in April 2019, and one of my first projects was the digitization strategy. So on one hand, we want to digitize our huge historic collections, and on the other hand, we wanted to update the workflows and digitize the processes and renew our service portfolio. And the recent development was the newly formed Department Discovery Services and Information Management, which includes the library, the Coordination Office for publishing, scientific publishing, as well as the archive. Before this, the archive and library were never connected, at least when it comes to organizational structures, although we work closely together on a daily basis. So it's great for us to have an actual team with the colleagues in the archive. The digitization strategy is in line with the so-called Zukunftsplan of the Museum für Naturkunde, which means literally the future plan. With the future plan, the museum, can finally renew the building sites. We will have a new concept for the museum and the research here. And we will, for example, form a science campus with the Humboldt University. And in this process, we are also disclosing our collection and transform them into a more digital collection. And the library team is very much engaged and involved in these activities in different forms. For the library itself, it means that this upcoming year will transform us from an analog traditional museum library to a modern hybrid research library. So this was the situation at the end of 2019. So you can imagine at the beginning of 2020, we were highly motivated to start the transformation and implement our ambitious plans. And then the pandemic hit us. On March 12th, we closed the library for external users, also because some of our team members belong to the high-risk groups for the COVID. And on the following Monday, on March 16, we were all sent home. Before leaving the museum, we talked about tasks that could be done from home, at least for the next 2 weeks, so that we had the chance to take all the needed materials with us. This actually means that my colleague packed up all boxes in which he stored the cards where we would record ongoing loans, as we had no electronic loan system, so that he could transfer the information into the database at home. We did not know then that it would last until mid-May that we could return to the museum. The first question was, how are we keeping in contact and make sure that everyone is okay? Because a pandemic is always a challenging time. So obviously we had our online fix and meetings for formal communication. We were strongly looking for formats for personal or informal communication. So we have coffee roundtable every once a month. You have the chance to book one-on-one meetings with some of your colleagues. We had successful Zoom parties that I can highly recommend if anyone thought of this. We had online escape games. We had a Christmas party in the back where I sent out parcels with everything you would need for a successful Christmas party, so that we could meet online, but have all the supplies for this party at home. And the next big question was, how were we able to work from home when a lot of our processes were strongly analog and paper-based? As I mentioned, we tried to transform a lot of these paper-based materials or documentations into an electronic form, especially the workflow documentation or records like ongoing loans. Our registration process is now completely online, and also the deed registration is done by email. Before that, people would need us to approve that there are no ongoing lines on a paper-based checklist as part of the offboarding process. And we also changed the acquisition workflow. As we could not enter the library to receive newly delivered books or do the cataloging, we now offer the option that our supplier is sending the requested books directly to the users, and then we will do the cataloging after we return to the museum. Obviously, there were tasks that we could not do from home. Originally, we had service hours in some of our 15 library locations at the museum. And we shifted the service hours to online services, to online consultation hours, but canceled that in June due to low demand. Before the pandemic, people would come to the library and do their own copies from the collection. We would be open for external visitors. We would participate in interlibrary loan and document delivery services. All of this was not possible anymore. And I was so happy that in 70 or maybe in 80% of the cases, we were able to refer the users to the BHL where they found the digitized material. We had trouble accessing some of our e-journals, and therefore we also highly promoted the Unpayable add-on, which was a very supportive tool for our users. And often they could find the open access version also in the BHL. And although we could not scan for the BHL, we did a lot of post-processing of previously scanned material, which was a bottleneck before. And thanks to the browser and cloud-based infrastructure of the BHL, we were able to upload our material. We caught up with some of our originally public events online, like the book presentation and Tour of the Library on Instagram. And to give a fantastic overview over what has been done in the museum throughout the last year, my colleague created an advent calendar where we informed about different activities. And we actually had more than 24 ideas. By the way, the BHL was behind one of the calendar doors. We are very much, it was just amazing to see what we managed to do despite the difficult situation. As the library, we were very much involved in the new data portal of the museum, as well as in setting up a label transcription projects on Zooniverse called Beats and Bytes, which, by the way, was also very helpful for staff at home to keep on with the disclosure of our collection as they would transcribe the labels from home. Additionally, we managed to continue with our popular transcription workshops, where participants would learn reading old handwritten scripts, basically from our archival material. And although we did, it was a bit difficult to find good online tools for do this. So if you had similar events, let me know how you organize this. And I'm very excited to present the library in the next writing workshop, where participants hopefully get an inspirational introduction into our work and the collection, and then they will write short literary texts about the library. Also, a very important new format for us were the scientific data and information management series, where we had the chance to inform our colleagues in the museum about different topics from our working field. We also use the recorded sessions to offer library introductions, as the registration is now online and we cannot do the introduction on site. And at the beginning of this year, we also held a session about the BHL, and we quickly realized how useful it would be to have information material in German about the BHL. So we therefore made 2 tutorials, one for advanced users and one for the more general public. And both will be soon published on BHL's YouTube channels. So what's the current situation? Today we are back with basically the same health and safety instructions and hygiene concepts that we have since April last year. The key parts are to keep the context as low as possible, or to reduce the context as much as possible. To focus on the tasks that can only be done while being in the library, and to make preparations for the work that can be done from home. For example, for our cataloging our historical collections, we are scanning the title page, counting the pages, and then the colleagues from home will do the actual cataloging process. And we're still closed for external users. And although sometimes we do have some of our colleagues are coming into the library in exceptional cases. So the transformation that had to be done to continue with the library services during the pandemic did luckily not derail us from our original development strategy. We just shifted some priorities, and in some aspects were actually some steps ahead of our plans. We started digitizing the workflows earlier than we planned, and we're more creative and flexible now to choose different formats when it comes to seminar sessions or workshops, depending on the purpose. And last but not least, we have now a fairly good digitization process, also thanks to BHL support, and we were one of the first departments or collections who had such a good infrastructure for the digitization workflow. Nevertheless, we need to keep on with some other steps that we could not do during the last year, like moving the collections. We have to move the whole library collection by summer 2022. And we're currently writing the preparation for this. We will engage more in pursuing our own research projects, especially in the fields of digital humanities and open access. And we're also we're engaged more in investigating the special situation of museum libraries, not only regarding the pandemic, but also the challenges to keep up with library developments. Currently, we're running a study on open access and museum libraries, and the results will be presented at the LIBA virtual conference in 2021. Thanks to changed working experience, we keep on testing and experimenting with new formats and events, and we also keep on evaluating and renewing our service portfolio. And I think in this case, we're a bit more brave than we used to be before the pandemic. And there are obviously a lot of other tasks to do in our digitization strategy as well. So to draw a conclusion, the last year and still ongoing situation was an emotional roller coaster. But when I did the presentation, the review to me seems to be like a silver lining. At some point last year, I was not sure how we could stay operational, how we would we could support the researchers when we are at home and not in the library. But we managed to maintain most of our services, and also thanks to strong networks like the BHL. We also kept our ambitious plans, although there were some shifts. But all in all, I think it was not a lost year, but one that forced us to be brave, to overcome hurdles and fears, and to reset the library to some point. And I feel that we're very much emerging strengthened from the situation. And yeah, so thank you very much. I'm very happy to hear from the colleagues that they had similar struggles and we're kind of all in the same situation.
Thank you, Elisa. Danke vielmals. Thank you. I think what you've been telling us is not only that you've been able to reorganize your whole library workflow in a few weeks, but you've also been very creative. And I'd be actually curious more privately to learn how you organize an escape game during a lockdown, especially online. We have a couple of questions. We'll get back to them during the discussion. We're going to cross back all the Atlantic because we're going to New York. Tom Baione will be our next speaker. Tom Baione is the director at the American Museum of Natural History Library. Just before you start your presentation, Tom, I just want to share that during this pandemic, we've had this very sweet exchange. We did Wild Interlibrary Alone together. You were looking for an article about Scorpion. It was 3 pages, and I could crawl into our library in Paris, find it, get it scanned, and send it to you. And that's where I thought BHL works at many scales. Tom, up to you.
Thanks, Gildas. Yes, in fact, my first visit back to my library was for an interlibrary loan back last June. I think my screen is up. I'm going to talk about how tools and services from BHL and the challenge of a pandemic have inspired the library at AMNH to speed up some of our planned efforts to enhance online access to our resources. And let's see, sorry. There we go. When the American Museum of Natural History closed its doors to visitors and to staff early last March, many of us couldn't have imagined that the crisis would continue for weeks and for months and persist as long as it has. While the museum has been open to visitors since September of 2020 at reduced numbers, please come visit, there's lots of room. Staff are still not back in force. We continue to operate on a as-need based system for returning to work. Construction of the museum's new building, the Gilder Center for Science, Education, and Innovation, where the library's future public spaces will relocate, has continued apace right outside my office windows, and has been a positive sign of the progress towards the future. You can see the excavation site here, looking northwest from the library. I have to thank a colleague at the BHL at the Smithsonian for introducing me to Zoom a short time before Zoom became ubiquitous and then synonymous with the pandemic. That earlier experience showed me how easy Zoom was to use. So I have to credit BHL with that priceless early video conferencing tutorial. Our library has a small staff and everyone wears multiple hats, including spending time at the reference desk each week. Suddenly this need was gone, as were all the tasks associated with managing walk-in visitors and their requests. In-person researcher appointments were on hold too. And while this was disappointing to many, this change required little explanation. And with schools closed and museum education department programs halted, there were no school groups to welcome. This was an opportunity. The AMNH library was part of the collaborative CLIR-funded BHL member Field Notes project in 2016 and 2017. This was an effort to digitize historic scientific field notebooks held at various BHL member libraries. While putting the digitized field notebooks online was a revolutionary step forward in terms of increasing access, the actual content of these notebooks remained locked up and largely inaccessible in the unsearchable manuscript context. And here you see a page from Roy Chapman Andrews' 1919 to 1930 field notebook. Most of it focuses on Mongolia, but this page is from somewhere in the Canadian West. During the earliest days of the pandemic, multiple staff members began transcribing these digital field note manuscripts. The library is just beginning to develop a digital asset management system that can accommodate such transcription records, but also having these transcriptions living in the ecosystem of BHL is key to rendering the content even more highly discoverable than just the digitization of the page images. And then once again here, you can see in the center of the page, the image of the journal itself, and then to the right, the transcription that was recently completed, and then obviously on the left, the navigation throughout the volume. Our reference work, student and staff orientations have always included a tutorial on searching the BHL, but in the last year, BHL's online presence has become invaluable, not only for museum staff and students and librarians, but for external researchers too. We've heard from an Andean archaeologist based in New York, to an invertebrate zoologist describing Eastern Mediterranean decapod crustaceans, to a museum zoologist using digitized field notebooks to map the course of historic museum collection expeditions. He works with a bunch of high school students who are assisting him virtually in this effort. The BHL Global Names Finder tool has been a game changer for BHL and its users. Consortia like the BHL help members with common needs. A scientific name finder has been on our library's wish list for some time, something we had tried to solve at a hackathon we hosted a few years back without much success. Again, our users aren't concerned with which solutions are homegrown or shared, as long as the materials are accessible and the tools that help their research are developed and available to them. At a time when many libraries are seeing staff and budget reductions, the more we can leverage our consortia, the better. The ability to search across the BHL corpus for an instance of a biological name has made the AMNH selfishly wonder, what about all the names in the AMNH's museum's digitized scientific publications? The museum digitized the full runs of its 3 actively published scientific journals in 2000 and made them accessible online, open access, shortly thereafter. We continue to add newly published issues to our open access repository. But the content of these digital publications was, once again, like the digitized field journal images, the content was locked up. Despite being digitized, the near 6,000 issues of AMNH scientific publications were only represented in BHL as external links out to the PDFs in the museum's digital repository. We didn't have the ability to add these PDFs to BHL in full text. The full text, including any of the scientific names mentioned, would not be found by the name finder search and would not appear as part of the search results for that name in the corpus of BHL. Thanks to BHL's Macaw tool, we can now upload these PDFs to BHL, enabling their text and names to be discoverable in BHL. Staff have begun this work, and eventually, with the help of technically savvy volunteers and interns, we'll begin to work our way through our near 6,000 issues. In 2020, BHL created and released a BHL KBART file, the Knowledge Base and Related Tools Standard. This file can enable knowledge bases to discover item-level holdings data, including books, journals, and articles, where article-level data has been created. KBART files can be added to a knowledge base to enable discovery of these resources in integrated library systems. This allows for searching across the holdings of designated groups of digital content, such as library subscriptions to a specific publisher's offerings, groups of ebooks, or the content of open access collections like BHL. We thought how exciting that finally individual books, journals, and articles in the corpus of BHL could be discovered and accessed in a single search, along with our licensed resources right from our catalog. But wait, we didn't have a modern discovery layer on our catalog, and we were unable to fully take advantage of this excellent BHL development. Our integrated library system vendor's discovery layer was proposed to us, but the costs were way beyond our means. So in the middle of the pandemic, we began to look for other options. We identified a not-for-profit group's ILS system, and with the prize of direct BHL access in mind, we decided to change integrated library systems mid-pandemic. We're now in the midst of a 7-month migration and implementation effort with a planned launch date of July 1st. Our new integrated library system will not only enable one search across the access to the BHL corpus to our subscriptions, but our ultimate hope is to configure it to connect to our instance of archive space, our archive catalog, a major component of AMNH Libraries holdings. Here's an architect's rendering of the museum's Gilder Center, the library's future home. Spurred on by the pandemic, the AMNH scientific publications in BHL will begin to be accessible to species name searches, and the inclusion of transcribed manuscript content will begin to provide deeper access to our digitized archival field notebooks. Supported by and enhanced by BHL services, the AMNH library will emerge from this crisis with a new integrated library system that will allow us to connect directly to BHL assets and to our own archival holdings. Combined with a grant project to implement a robust, format-agnostic digital asset management system and our current migration to an upgraded and remotely hosted version of our digital article repository, the AMNH library will emerge mid-2021 in a strong, more integrated position, in a better place to serve our users and make our content increasingly discoverable, supporting our careful stewardship of our digital assets in our post-pandemic future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Maybe I'll get back to you later on with questions related to the new building, if this pandemic experience has led you to rethink some of your plans, and maybe this question will be interesting for Lisa and Jen as well. So I'm sharing it now so that you can think about it. But now we're going to cross the Atlantic again. You know, the Statue of Liberty was designed in Paris and a gift from the French to the Americans. So we're crossing the Atlantic to meet my own colleagues, Alice Lemaire, who's my successor as Director of Libraries here at the museum in Paris, and Laurence Benichou, our partner in crime, who's the lead of the academic or science press at the Muséum d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris. So they'll give you perspectives both from a librarian and a publisher's perspective as to their experience with this crisis and with BHL. So probably because the French have a reputation for being late, and also because it's always hard to understand when they speak English, both presentations have been pre-recorded, but Alice and Laurence are with us and they'll be taking part in the discussion. So please continue sharing your questions in the Q&A section.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alice Lemaire, Director of Libraries and Documentation at AMNH, the French National Natural History Museum. In this talk, I will present the AMNH Library and its commitment into BHL, and I will focus on the opportunities and new challenges revealed in these strange pandemic times. Our institution was created in 1635 by the King Louis XIII as a royal garden for medicinal purposes and an educational institution. In 1793, it became the National Natural History Museum during the French Revolution, and our logo is in fact one of the legacy of these origins, with a design that has changed very little since then. The AMNH collection includes today about 70 million specimens. This collection constitutes a global archive and a major research infrastructure. Being a very important center of research and teaching, the institution gathers 13 locations and is deeply committed to preserving biodiversity and to sharing knowledge with the public through its galleries, botanical gardens, zoos, and libraries. The library, actually a main library and several specialized libraries, is one of the world's largest natural history libraries. The collection contains more than 2 million documents of all kinds, printed and electronic books and periodicals, manuscripts and archives, maps, drawings, photographs, and art collection. The library takes part to the French Higher Education Libraries Network and is also associated to the French National Library, which means many cooperation possibilities at national level. Digitization is among these possibilities, and we built our digital library in partnership with the French National Library. The AMNH Library launched its first digitization program 20 years ago, beginning with the academic publication the AMNH has been releasing since 1802, and including the publication of the related learned societies. Since 2014, we enriched this first program with a second one devoted to taxonomic documentation. It is a research-driven digitization program built in collaboration with the AMNH researchers. We are also developing a third program to share the treasures of the library. This embraces precious books, manuscripts, and archives, iconography, such as the famous vellum collection, scientific objects, and artworks. our digital library is harvested by Gallica, the French National Library digital library. And this is with the French National Library that the AMNH took part to the BHL Europe project from 2009 to 2012. Although this project probably slowed down our integration into BHL, it nevertheless enabled us to formalize and perpetuate our digitization policy. By the end of the BHL Europe project, the AMNH library began technical discussions with BHL, and our membership finally came into effect in 2016. And this is a picture of this famous day. Soon after that, we had a remote Macau workshop provided by the BHL Secretariat and Joseph de Vere. And by now we are used both to Macau and to remote workshops. And we really started to upload content in September 2017. Among our digital collection, we began our contribution with the AMNH academic publication with the generous support of Joseph de Vere, who helped us with the retrospective loading of the BHL Europe files. And the complete collection of AMNH academic publications from 1802 to 2000 is now available, and the publication of the learned societies related to the AMNH are to be our next contribution. Let's focus now on the sanitary crisis and how BHL helped and is helping us through this period. During the first lockdown, which took place in France from March to May 2020, colleagues in charge of content uploading into BHL were able to pursue this task full-time, which increased our production. The last BHL Europe files were loaded by our own during this period. More than 100,000 pages were added in 2020, and as you can see on the graph, the production was especially high during the first lockdown, because at that time we had no access to the buildings, and it is quite different now. If the production increased, the outreach was also higher in 2020 as well, with an increase of more than 70%, both in the number of visitors and the number of pages viewed. And it seems that we are now better identified as the French access point to BHL, both by learned societies and by researchers who ask for information or help. But we did not only increase our production and our audience. The first lockdown was a very difficult time, especially for people who had no remote work and felt deprived of their professional identity. So later on, we tried to find new tasks for people for whom no remote tasks were defined yet. What were these new tasks? 5 years ago, I attended with Laurence Benichouche, who will just talk after me. I attended the BHL at 10 meeting in London, and in his closing note, Roderick Page made a brilliant case for the articles, and especially the articles he was not able to find in BHL Europe. BHL Europe, which he called an unhackable zombie. And he also declared, which impressed me a lot, we live and die by articles. And at that time, the AMNH was not a member to BHL yet. And by listening to him, I thought our road would be very, very long. But then we had this pandemic and this search for new remote tasks. And my colleague Clément Houry began a very fruitful dialogue with Rod, and by the end of 2020, they set up a workflow for the gathering of article metadata. It works with a spreadsheet like this one. In red, you can see all the information added by the library staff, the first and the last pages of each article, the URL of the first page, or every other missing information about the author or the title. And then it's magic. The table of contents button appears, which is of course very satisfying and very useful. And Rod created also a monitoring dashboard. And since January 2021, the work is done for 3 journals, such as Adansonia. As you can see on the right, it represents 1,030 articles, and a lot more are in the line. So why BHL matters? The pandemic turned out to be an accelerator of digital awareness and transformation, not only at management level, but more widely with the whole library staff as well. In some way, by providing new remote tasks, BHL reduced inequalities inside our library team and offered new opportunities. This greater involvement has also strengthened our senses of belonging to BHL, which is definitely not only a resource, but also a community that helps us go through this difficult period. Now we have to continue and perpetuate these projects, and we intend to capitalize on all this work also in our own digital library by using DOIs. This work on articles indeed is a driver for the evolution of our systems and will help us to be part of a larger movement. At the time we are launching the renewing of our information system. The goal of this new system are to better connect documentary and naturalist collection and to face the challenge of insertion and interoperability in the European and international ecosystem in which BHL participates. So being a partner to BHL makes definitely sense for us, and it will be all the more precious in the next month. I would like to end this presentation with special thanks to Joseph De Vere for his generous help and to Roderick Page for his stimulating collaboration. Thanks also to the AMNH and fantastic team who raises repeatedly our institution in the contributors top 5. Angélique Laurenceau, Anya Godefroy, Thierry Gauvin and Quentin Orléans for content upload. Angélique Laurenceau again, Axel Ernu and Marc Morvan for gathering articles metadata for the AMNH publication. Ludivine Javelot, Mélanie Allemand, Laurent Randriage-Par and Florent Jakubowicz for the digitization operations. Christine Bastard, Sephora Agbotse, Hélène Gauvin and Maureen Votor in the restoration workshop. Marion Brunetti for promoting BHL toward the AMNH students. Of course, Chloé Bezombe and Clément Houry. And last but not least, Laurence Bénichou and Gilda Sillien, who were the driving forces behind our membership into BHL. Now I invite you to meet virtually some of these very valuable people in the videos that come next, before coming and visiting us for real later on. My colleague and I are looking forward to hosting an in-person annual meeting in Paris in the near future. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ludivine, and I am the manager of the digitization team. There are two other staff people in the team. One is in charge of internal digitization. The other takes care of the documents that are sent to our digitization contractor. Developing the annual digitization program is a critical part of my job. We need to ensure it is consistent with other digitization programs. I'm especially thinking to Gallica, the digital library of the National Library of France. And we also put an emphasis on the document which may be uploaded on BHL. We are also providing on-demand digitization for researchers, especially when the requests emanate from the BHL network. This is a great tool to have a better understanding of the needs of our public.
Good morning, my name is Quentin Orléans, and I'm working since 2017 as a library assistant at the library of the museum. Among other duties, I'm in charge of publishing online the document digitized by our library. I'm also in charge of ingesting some of these documents in BHL. I share these responsibilities with my colleague, Thierry Gauvin. First, we upload the digitized images and their metadata files to our digital library. Then we ingest the digitized images and their bibliographic information in Macao using MARC XML files. Finally, we pass the baton to Angélique for the last steps of Macao ingest. Our missions related to BHL allow us to maintain a sufficient work activity even during the March 2020 lockdown. Working on BHL helps us feeling useful for the scholarly community as we continue our librarian mission to provide access to many documents that are critical to the research. This is particularly important in this period when we need to support and promote scientific research in France and elsewhere. We would like to thank BHL for that.
My name is Angélique. I work for the museum's library since 2018 as a library clerk. One of my principal missions is to contribute to the Biodiversity Heritage Library. More precisely, I'm in charge of adding metadata in the publication digitized by the museum. I'm using Macao to do that. Concretely, I indicate the type of each scan, each page ingested to BHL, text, illustration, blank page, map, chart, etc. I also report the pagination of the issues. It is especially important to check there are no errors before the upload to BHL. For example, I check if there are missing pages. With the pandemic and the first lockdown in France, I started remote working on this metadata. As a result, much more issues were uploaded in 2020 than the previous years, and the digital collections of the museum have improved their visibility. Since December 2020, my mission evolved. I also participate to the identification of articles in the museum's collection, thanks to a cooperation with Roadpage, a researcher from Glasgow University. From a spreadsheet he generates two colleagues and I check and complete all informations relating to the article, like the author's name, the title's article, the article's title, and the starting and ending pages. We also indicate the link of the article on BHL and the link of the article on Wikidata. Thanks to this data, it's now possible to research by article on BHL. I appreciate to have new activities for BHL, and I'm glad to participate to the development of an international digital library.
Hi, my name is Marion Brunetti. I'm librarian and I'm in charge of information literacy training programs. I'm also in charge of the Museum Open Science Digital Repository. The Natural History Museum in Paris welcomes each year about 270 master students and 150 PhD students. Library staff are involved in their training curriculum. We teach students about issues related to scientific and technical information. At the beginning of the academic year, we show to all our master students important resources for their studies and, among them, Biodiversity Heritage Library. We also have a special training program in information literacy for our master students who have chosen museology as a specialty. With them, we explore further the BHL platform. We show them advanced functionality of searching, such as using a scientific name either in the advanced search engine or how to browse by collection. And we present Biodiversity Heritage Library to our PhD students in their first year. We can say that Biodiversity Heritage Library has a dedicated place in our information literacy programs.
Good morning, good afternoon to all. So my purpose today is to give you a publisher perspective on how BHL can better serve the biodiversity community, and especially during such a sanitary crisis. But first, let me introduce you the French Natural History Museum Science Press, what we publish, and most importantly, how we publish it. So the museum is a scientific publisher since 1802. We still have over 1,500 titles in the catalog. The team is responsible for the whole workflow from the submission of a paper or a manuscript until its dissemination and archiving, through its publication and the management of the peer review process, of course. All publications are peer-reviewed by international experts, and the Science Press employs 15 people with the same activities as in any publishing house. The publishing staff works closely with 20 researchers acting as a scientific editor. The editorial policy is something very important for any publishing house. So the Museum Science Press publishes original scientific results in the field of competence of the museum, from anthropology to zoology, through botany, earth science, geology, entomology, history of science, ethnology, etc. We especially focus on works that valorize the collection of the institution. The Science Press plays an active role in the institution's strategy toward open science, and in particular by the implementation of the Diamond Open Access for all its journals since 2000, but also by implementing a new XML-first based workflow for our publication. So we publish a variety of publications. We have nowadays 9 series of monographs, Some of them are co-published, some of them are produced in both digital-born version and print version, and all the legacy books have been digitalized and are available in BHL. We also have published 10 peer-reviewed journals. 9 of them are covered by an impact factor and a Scopus Science score. All of them are diamond open access in the Science Press website. And of course, once again, all the articles published from 1802 until 2000 have been digitalized and are accessible through BHL. And the article published since 2000 are available on the website of the Science Press. So now we are working to go from open access to fair access. So what is missing into the open access compared to the fair access is what stands for the I, meaning the interoperability. So in order to make interoperability, we have a partnership with Platzi for the liberation of the data content in the published articles from the PDF, and so as soon as the PDF is published. We also are working on the implementation of a new XML first-based workflow that would allow us finer granularity, but that also ensures sustainability and preservation for the articles, since the XML is much more stable than the PDF. And that would also allow us to produce dynamic articles, linking the data in the article to databases, and from the databases back to the article. So let me describe how the workflow works. Let's take an example with the European Journal of Taxonomy, but of course, all our journal works the same and have the same workflow. So as soon as the PDF is published, it is processed by Platzi through a template and standards that have been developed by EGT teams. So all the data, the material citation, the metadata, the taxonomic treatments are deposited into the Platzi treatment bank, in which all the treatments, the taxonomic treatment, are separated. So you can take a specific taxonomic treatment and all the information related to this taxon is extracted here. And Platzi gives a persistent identifier for this taxonomic treatment. The publication life science identifiers is also given and linked to Zoobank. The original DOI of the publication in AGT is also given here, and there's another DOI leading to the publication in Zenodo. Then all the treatment and the information about this treatment is given here and there. You can see here that this is the original publication in which this taxon has been described the first time. This publication is available in BHL, but sadly, this is not linked to BHL. So this is one of the first things that should be done from my point of view. But let's continue the workflow. So here we have our publication in PDF. It's also sent to Biodiversity Literature Repository, where all the data are parsed automatically and the article is archived there. All the figures of the paper are also downloadable from Zenodo in high resolution, and they are given a DOI so they can be linked easily in Zenodo. So through this system, the publication is linked with several identifiers. The DOI of the cited publication some here. The DOI of the taxonomic treatment content in the paper. So all of this, the LSID in the bank, and also the DOI of the figures attributed by Zenodo. So then the data set is also harvested by GBIF from the Platzi treatment bank, where in GBIF you can find also all the information about the materials examined. So to summarize the workflow, you have the PDF in the center, then the data is automatically extracted to from the PDF to Platzi treatment bank. It's also linked to the zoobank. The data set is sent or harvested by GBIF, and it's also deposited into Zenodo. So in this scheme, we can see the ecosystem of linked data from the paper itself in the center, which sites or is cited by Platzi treatment bank, GBIF, Zenodo, zoobank, or AMNH, and it leads to a link to the digital specimen or the specimen itself. So this is not done yet, but it's ongoing, and that would probably be the case through the DISCO platform. So what about BHL in this ecosystem? Sadly, BHL remains absent of this ecosystem. And in my point of view, BHL could be linked to the publication in two sections. The obvious one being the references section, of course. So we insert DOI from publication leading to the DOI in Crossref, but not from legacy publication available through BHL. And yet most of the references are available through BHL and only in BHL. The second place where we could also link the publication is the Baione description. So the first time the taxon is described in the original description, or any time in the synonymy list where the first publication is cited. So here it could be easily linked to BHL, providing that, of course, we have a DOI and that the article has metadata to be pointed. So before I end my presentation, I'd like to present you a new ongoing project named Bicycle. So Bicycle stands for Biodiversity Community Integrated Knowledge Library. It's a European project led by Pensoft, for which the museum is partner on behalf of the CITAF e-publishing working group. So the Bicycle project aims at providing new methods and workflows for an integrated access to extracted data from literature. So the purpose is to extract data from legacy literature and also ongoing literature. So the rationale behind the project is the inefficient use of and access to the data imprisoned in PDF, legacy PDF, but also ongoing publication. Typically, in the crisis we are facing, we have an urgent need to have access to all the data content in the huge amount of literature in BHL. And I'm very happy to know that BHL supports Bicycle, and I'm looking forward to producing dynamic articles linked to BHL in a very near future. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would be glad to answer any question you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurence. And now we all know that in Paris, because of the pandemic, we're mostly using bicycles rather than the metro to go from home to work when we can go to work. And thank you, Alice, and all the team. I hope you haven't heard too much of our wonderful wide range of French accents during those presentations, but you know, having so many people from our staff speaking English, making a film for a meeting like this one is a really a first, and that says a lot about our commitment to this community that BHL is. So I think now we are back. We have about 20 minutes of discussion. We've received a couple of questions. I have some of my own. I'll start with the direct questions that have been addressed to first to Jacqueline. So I'll take the question and read them. We don't repeat compliments. You've received many compliments, but focus on questions. So Jacqueline, Siobhan Lichman, I hope I pronounced the name properly, is just loving your presentation, Jacqueline. Really pleased that tagging the BHL Flickr feed was undertaken. Thank you so much to all the staff doing the work. Do you have documentation available that you use to help staff with tagging? I'm asking as I want to know whether I can improve my own documentation for BHL tagging.
Hi, Siobhan. Yes, we largely are relying on BHL's robust documentation for Flickr tagging. And during this time, as we've been working through it, we've had questions and augmented that documentation with help from Grace Costantino of the BHL Secretariat. So we really don't have any internal documentation that is different from what BHL has on its own. I'd also say that a relatively small number of staff working with us are doing the machine tagging. I think that understandably, some staff don't feel as confident with that, and I didn't want to push anyone, especially right now. So staff are really focusing on the pagination aspect and then the upload with keyword tagging, and there are only a handful of staff who are doing the machine tagging. For example, in our Natural History Museum library, our librarian who is charged with the birds collection has been working on taxonomic name tagging for birds materials. And then we have a number of other staff, including staff from the National Museum of American History, looking at artist names tags and also taxonomic name tags for materials that are related to North America. And again, that's all following with the BHL documentation that's available on the BHL website and linked from the BHL Flickr site.
Thank you. Is this, let me think that many of us, I think Lisa mentioned that as well, translating some of the BHL guidelines in German. We've done the same in Paris in French. So I think this pandemic has been leading us to share the BHL work with more people in our teams, and therefore have procedures written where they might not have been written or customized before that. I think it could be interesting to share those sorts of documents. Thinking of our Canadian French, for instance, Canadian colleagues, for instance, if they'd be interested in French or sharing guidelines in French related to BHL, and I'm sure same would apply for German. Next to another question, which is addressed to Tom. The question comes from Mylène, Mylène Filingas-Gagnon in Canada, precisely. Thanks, Thomas, very interesting. What ILS did you choose to integrate BHL tool?
I knew I was going to get that question. I didn't want my presentation to be an advertisement for the new system. We are moving to a World Share Management System, which is put out by OCLC.
That's fine. We needed just the answer to this question. I have then a question that actually is addressed to the three of you, if I don't mistake myself. While we're enjoying the pandemic, we're also about to start a project including a new building. So if I understand well, that's the case in Berlin for Elisa. That's the case for Jane. You mentioned a new center for science in London, or possibly outside of London. And that's also your case, Thomas. I was really, and we actually have a big project in Paris that is just at the blueprint level of taking many of the collections outside of Paris over the next 20 years. It's a huge project. So I was thinking, has this experience of the pandemic lead you to adjust, if possible, depending on the level of maturity of the construction or rebuilding project. Does that this experience that is still now change your plans as to how to design the library service, or the way the user experience will be envisaged, or the work organization will be envisaged? So maybe Jane, you would like to start with this? Your mic must be on. Yeah,
and if I unmute. So thank you. That's a really interesting question, and thank you for that. From the NHM's perspective, the centre that will be constructed will be outside of London. It will be in Oxfordshire, which is, I can't remember how long it'll take you to get there, but it's a minimum of an hour to 2 hours outside of London. I think what the pandemic will help with for the programme is the lessons learned in terms of how people currently are working in a mixture of places, working from home, sometimes going on site. Sometimes we have colleagues who are already working at Tring who move between sites. So it's drawing together all those lessons to understand what kind of facilities and what kind of connectivity, what technical support colleagues will need across all 3 sites. Does it give more flexibility in terms of where people need to be in order to work effectively? In terms of collections, though, a lot of work has been happening over the summer period, and I think that how and what we're digitising and how we're making it available, how people are accessing that content, will influence what might be relocated or stay at South Kensington or stay at Tring. But I think it's in terms of what the building might look like, it's still relatively early stages.
Thank you, Jen. I turn to Lisa now. Thank you. Lisa, I'm turning to you. I think here the context is different because the building remains in the cities, but still, does it affect the general plan in your case?
So far we're still in the blueprint phase, but yet we do already know that we cannot keep all the collections in the place that where the museum is situated right now. So there will be at least a second building, permanent building in the outskirts of Berlin. So it's still easy to go there by public transport. Yet we are already facing the situation that we have more staff than we have office spaces. So what we learned also in the pandemic is to share desks, share office spaces, and to work from home on more frequently. Actually, this is also what staff members thought was a positive aspect of the pandemic. And we are currently evaluating what can remain. There will be a library space in the middle of Berlin, and there will also be the historical collections will move to the second building, which will become like a storage building. So we are evaluating which collection will move to the outskirts and which will stay in the center. And but during the time when we have to get out of the building currently and we cannot move into the new building, the collections will be stored somewhere. We don't know this yet. And we are evaluating all the requests because a lot of colleagues said, okay, everything is online. Our researchers only need current research literature from the last 5 years, which is also online. And we just saw what kind of years are, or what literature do our colleagues need from what kind of years. And it's mostly from the 70s, 60s, 80s, which is due to copyright issues not online and not accessible. So we will probably keep the historic collections and everything that's digitized in a place where we do not have to access them on a regular basis, and keep everything from the 60s, 50s, 70s closer to us, wherever we will work.
You'll be keeping the treasure. Tom, moving to, thank you, Elisa. Tom, moving to your project, which I think is quite advanced from the pictures we saw. Will there be any change in the program for the library after this?
I should say that that last image you saw was a rendering by the architects. The building is almost topped out at this point, but the beautiful facade image I shared that has not been realized yet. Though we are told that we will be in our new space late next summer, which is very exciting and simultaneously terrifying that it will happen that quickly. We don't anticipate any design changes based on the current situation. The new reading room space is quite spacious. Folks will be able to spread themselves out. We anticipate multiple types of seating, from traditional library tables to many individual chairs, as well as some, comfortable group seating, sofas. We also, while we recognize that the future of the library and access to the collections is going to be increasingly digital, there's still a great interest in the physical collections. All of our collections are stored on site. They'll be adjacent to the new reading room. And in addition to what we are going to display to visitors, we anticipate displaying a great deal of materials from across the library collections in the new space. We think folks still want to use the library as a space to do library work and to have that proximity to the collections themselves. People still want to see print collections, even though they've been digitized. And of course, not everything has been digitized, and it'll be some time before it all is. And even some digitized materials, that's really just a version of that object. It's not the object itself. And we plan on continuing providing access to the physical objects, particularly the rare books, and celebrating the physicality and craft and history of those important objects.
Yes, I think we're all wondering, whenever this ends, will the users come back? And I was thinking of restaurants. Restaurants have been closed for a year. We're dying to go to a restaurant, and I don't think it's because we've got used to click and collect and Deliveroo that we will not go back to restaurants. And I was thinking if that would apply to libraries as well. I hope yes. We received more specific questions for Laurence that she will answer separately, because we only have a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to stay on a more general trend. I'd like to end this discussion with short answers from your side, a very open question, because what we've learned in your presentations you've been all amazing, and teams have been amazing in adjusting to an organization that had to be reinvented almost weekly. And we've invented quite a few things, and we've had many examples, whether in management, whether in data engineering, whether in online services. And I have one question for each of you, and pick up one answer of your choice from your heart. If there's one thing you've invented in that period that you definitely want to keep after the pandemic is over, because it's something that made you progress and you think is very valuable regardless of the pandemic, what would that thing, service, way of organizing work, what would it be? Jacqueline, you want to start? I know it's hard because you were not prepared for this, but what comes from your mind, from your heart?
The first thing that comes to mind, I think, is just the virtual tools we've been using to work together. So as I've sort of said, you all are working on new buildings. We don't actually have a building with Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. We're distributed. So we have little libraries inside of each Smithsonian museum. And as I mentioned, we're not just in the DC area, but also in New York and in the Republic of Panama. And so I think we hadn't really taken full advantage of some of these technologies to feel as a big team as part of all of SLA and gain familiarity with the work that we all do. We were a little bit siloed. And I think that this experience has allowed for us to do some cross-training and communication that we hadn't been doing previously. And I would say that that's even true within my own department. We have 3 different imaging labs, and so we work in 3 different locations. And we've been talking together more about the work that we do separately, but it's the same work, and making sure that we're all on the same page and doing exactly the same thing and learning tips and tricks from each other. So I think that really just taking advantage of the ability to just call someone up or work in collaborative spaces and exchange information and being aware of what each other does is something that I'm hoping we'll continue to do in the future.
Thank you. I'm trying to, yes, my notes, asynchronous collective work. So I think it's a good, it summarizes quite well what you picked up here. Jane, what will be, I mean, you're changing job, but what will you bring in your next job from that experience that's most useful?
Well, I was going to pick something actually, which meant that somebody else had to deal with it at the NHM. But I think one of the key things that has come out of our experience of the pandemic is colleagues have adapted incredibly well to these new working environments, but communication and maintaining, however you do it, that personal touch is incredibly important. So many colleagues have either discovered the library and archive range of content that's available to them, or they don't realize that it's accessible to them. So we've had this various feedback, and I think that improving our communication channels, not bombarding people with information, but thinking differently about how we make sure that every single person in the museum is aware of what is available to them so that they know what to tap into very quickly. I think people have a tendency not to care where they get their information from, but obviously we want them to get it from either BHL or our respective libraries. So I think that's one of the key learning lessons, to think differently about how we communicate and not lose that personal touch.
Thank you, Jen. Maybe shorter answer so that we manage to accommodate the break that's supposed to happen right after those 2 hours of intense discussion. Elisa?
One of the things I learned is to improve the technical skills in my team, to have more of our daily work documentation online, or at least make them accessible in an electronic way. And for us, it was important to keep up with to communicate more about the work that we're doing, not only to show the books, but what are we actually doing. It's just more than just sorting books from A to Z.
Thank you. Now I turn to you, Laurence. Laurence, has been instrumental in getting AMNH on BHL's board, and today she has told you very advanced things about data engineering in our field. But you're a publisher among librarians here today, but you've been through the same experience. And what should be the one thing you keep as a positive outcome of your adjustment to this?
Of the adjustment of what? Of the crisis
to the
itself?
crisis, yeah. In the way you work, in the way you look at your work.
So I would say that what the crisis has done for us is all the researcher was locked in their home with nothing else than being able to write article and to submit it. So I can tell you that we had an increase by 100% of submitted article, and that is thanks to the capacity of the researcher to be able to have all those literature through BHL. So I can tell you, because they told us that they could not be able to make all those articles and submit them in time during the pandemic, but they could, because they had all this literature available through BHL. So they had time and the literature, so they just wrote and wrote and wrote articles. So now we have a huge amount of paper to publish. So thank you.
And more work. Alice, what's your take back?
Yes, I think we were already very proud to provide access to information, but this pride has probably increased during the crisis, and it is more shared into the library at every level, I think. And what is interesting also is that maybe remote working was not part of our work culture before the crisis. And we will probably keep something of this crisis, and probably what was emergency telework will probably turn to some ongoing remote data consolidation, for example. So never waste a good crisis.
Tom, you'll have the last word. What will be the lesson from New York? Oh, your mic, Tom. You need to be, you're unmute, please.
Thanks. That's always important to have your mic on. As you're aware, we provide a robust interlibrary loan service, and but we never thought to apply that to our own collections in the form of scanning on demand, which we've done throughout the pandemic. I think that's something that will persist. Also, pre-pandemic, we had very irregular all-staff get-togethers, and we meet one-on-one or in small task-oriented groups, but not everyone all together regularly. And we've done that on a weekly basis with everyone in the library and archive staff over the last year. And I think that's something we'll try to keep going, even if that becomes a hybrid situation of some on site and some remote in the future.
Thank you very much. So we're now out of time for this session. I want to thank you and really very warmly each of our panel presenters for your perspectives, your insights, and to the audience for their questions. As a reminder, we'll make a recording of this session that will be available soon via our BHL Day 2021 event page. But this time, we're really good. We're only 2 minutes ahead. We'll take a 28-minute break, and we will resume our program promptly at 4 p.m. UTC time. See you soon.